All right. Hello, everyone. This is Megan Fuciarelli from Us Squared Consulting. I'm so excited to have another guest with us today as we discuss the Day of Accountability that's coming up on September 29th. So, before I get into too many details about the Day of Accountability, let's introduce Harold Love. Harold, I'm so excited you're with me today.
Good morning,
How's it
Megan. So excited
going?
to be here. It's going well. Having a good
Good.
start to my Monday morning.
Love it. Mondays are tough for most of us. I'm not going to exclude myself from that. And really, why I asked you to be a part of this conversation, because I genuinely think you are one of the most perfect people I can have on this conversation.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
yeah,
My check came then, huh?
absolutely. Your check came. No, I wouldn't need anything from you to be able to speak all of your praises, Harold. So, um, I know we've talked about this, but let's remind the audience. So, September 29th is the National Day of Accountability. And the day of 9/29 was chosen for the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that George Floyd was deprived of oxygen back in 2020. And when we first had this horrific murder and experience that so many people across the globe witnessed, there was a lot of response to how do we do this work? How do we hold people accountable? A lot of outrage, a lot of really significant political responses as well. And really, what we wanted to do at Us Squared was we wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that everyone remembered the important things that we need to do to hold one another accountable. That this is not simply something that the police officers need to be held accountable for. This is something for an entire community to be held accountable. And really looking and working to reduce racial bias and to encourage de escalation so it doesn't get to the point of having yet another murder. We've had a lot of murders of people of color specifically, and really just having the conversation. And that's what really drew me to you and to the work you do, because you specifically have conversations in this arena and you also have a wealth of experience. So I'm going to share a couple high level points and I'd love you to go deeper into it. But retired state police officer,
Hmm.
correct?
Yes.
You've worked as a detective. You have served on multiple nonprofit boards. You are a mental health counselor and social worker now, licensed clinical social worker, doing amazing things for our first responders. Can you share with everyone a little bit more about your background and kind of why you're here today?
Yeah. So just a couple of corrections there. So I'm a licensed professional counselor. So yes, a mental health counselor. Social worker is a different license, but we have the same scope of practice. And
Thank you
so
for
yes,
that.
thank you. So yeah, I grew up in Detroit and born and raised and uh, didn't want much to do with the police as an adult because of some experiences that I had, as a kid, just growing up in the neighborhood in the inner city. But however, fate would have it that I ended up becoming a state trooper. And I entered the department at 24. I wanted to get involved in something where my efforts made a difference. Always been a hard worker, always enjoyed helping people, but just felt like what I was doing was not making an impact. So I met a state trooper one day, and he, told me about his job and stood there and answered every question I had for about 40 minutes. And as he drove away, I said, "That's what I'm going to do." And so I served 25 years with the Michigan State Police, retired as a captain in 2013. As a young trooper, served as a youth services coordinator for my post area, which was Niles, Michigan at that time. Got really engaged in the community and helping young people and things like that. And so I always had that servant mentality, or providing a service to people throughout my career as a trooper, and then even as a commander, working with subordinates under my command, insisting and encouraging them to do the same. To remember why they got into the job and serving people and what that meant. So I had a great 25-year career. Saw some pretty terrible things as a young trooper, and with the help of our departmental psychologist, was able to move beyond those things. So later on, throughout my career, just mentoring other troopers, younger officers, people in the community, I realized how underserved we are in the area of mental health services, meaning culturally competent mental health services, people who understand the law enforcement culture, the inner city culture, or whatever culture that you're dealing with. You have to have a level of competence to it and able to be able to effectively serve or help that community. So, went back to grad school in 2011, 2.5 years before I retired. Got my grad degree in mental health counseling, got licensed, got some extra training and certification in psychological testing and assessment, and also critical incident stress management. So, in my practice today, which I started in 2014, I serve public safety professionals in the form of psychological evaluations, individual therapy, behavioral health education, and also critical incident stress management.
Wow. Wow. So really, this was something that as a child you thought you were not going to go into because you mentioned having some negative experiences, not the most pleasant experiences with officers.
Yeah.
And what I find so really empowering with that is that you decided to do more work with the youth later on so that our youth of today did not have the same experience that you had with officers.
Yeah, I made a commitment that as a police officer, I would never ever treat a person in a manner that would make them feel the way I felt when I encountered some police officers in my neighborhood.
Yeah. How do you think we can do more of that on a larger scale? Because I will say for myself, when I get pulled over now, even when I see an officer, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I get extremely nervous. My heart starts to beat fast. I am scared. If I get pulled over, it's even worse. I will start to either like cry or completely shut down because I'm so scared of what could happen with an officer pulling me over.
Hmm.
And I'm a white woman in society and I have that response.
Hmm.
It's so much more than just a race relations component. There's so much there. It's that fear of the police, it's that fear of what could happen. How can we, as a society, and then also what do you encourage officers to do to try and eliminate or alleviate some of that anxiety and fear that so many people experience?
Yeah. Well, the key word is accountability, which, we're talking about Day of Accountability. And we have a responsibility to be accountable to our oath, the things that we swore to uphold, as police officers. But members of the community, we also, have a responsibility to determine how you're going to perceive that officer. In other words, you know, we tend to paint people and things with a broad brush, that sort of thing. I've done some cultural competence training, and I talked about the fact that you know I grew up in a household with 11 people, 8 siblings, and mom and dad. And if I go down the list of what we all turned out, to be in our lives, what we did, with the profession, what kind of trouble we got in, and things like that. It's all across the board. And if that can happen in a household, then I think it's ludicrous to say that, everybody in my neighborhood is a knucklehead or a troublemaker and things like that. That's what, how we were treated. No matter what you're doing, certain cops came into the neighborhood, and just because they encountered you, they're going to treat you badly because you all are knuckleheads. Okay. I'm using knucklehead for the sake of an appropriate term, I guess. But at the same time, you know, um, like I say, it's ludicrous to be able for somebody to say that everybody in the neighborhood is this way. It's ludicrous to say that all black people are a certain way. Just as the same thing, goes in a reverse. It's ludicrous to say that all police officers are the types of police officers that I encountered when I was a kid. And that's what I learned as I grew older and started getting out of my neighborhood and driving more around the city and having encounters with police officers who were not those that formed my perception of police officers. I learned that, wow, those were just some knucklehead cops, knucklehead individuals who happen to be police officers, you know.
Mhm.
So, I opened up my mind. I increased my level of competence when it came to the law enforcement culture, and so much so that I decided, yeah, I'm going to do that. I don't have to be the way those officers were. I can be different. And
Mhm.
so when I was a sergeant and lieutenant at the Detroit Post, we had troopers who came from all over the state and reassigned to the police to Detroit. Never worked in the city, never even spent time in an inner city. And I would tell them, listen, you're going to encounter some people that just because you stop them, it's going to seem like they have a chip on their shoulder. Let me help you understand where that chip comes from. I would talk about some of my experiences and talk about the experiences of many people, especially black men growing up, in the city. And I tell them about, where that chip comes from. So, now you have an opportunity to change the perception that that person has of police officers by
Mhm.
not, countering their chip and all of a sudden getting into a confrontation, which you have the power and you have the control. You already know that. There's nothing to prove there. So have their focus be on changing this person's perception of law enforcement by treating them with dignity and respect. Even if you have to arrest them, you can treat them with dignity and respect and begin to change their perception of law enforcement. It's going to be better for the next officer that encounters this person, and it's going to be better for that person. It's going to be better for you. You have a say in the type of environment you're going to work in for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. If you want it to be us against them, it will be. If you want it to be, you are a part of this community and your role in that community is to serve and protect and enforce the law, then you can make it that too. And people will respect that just as they respect the postman and the firefighter and the bill collectors who come. They have a role and responsibility because we all operate on mutual respect and respecting the dignity and the person of each individual you come in contact with.
Yeah, that's such an important point though of you can hold people accountable and have respect for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be kind and hold people accountable. And I think people often think that those are exclusionary, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about police officers, that police officers should just be embracing and accepting and respectful and they shouldn't hold people accountable, right? Or they hold people accountable and they're jerks and they don't respect people, right? You can
Yeah.
have both. And it's that I love how you said the role to play in the community, right?
Yeah.
Because when we talk about starting that accountability and starting that transition from what I experience when I encounter a police officer to what you did experience as a child to what you're trying to instill now in other officers, we have to take those steps and we have to be able to say it starts with me, right? As Michael Jackson says, it starts with the man in the mirror, right? But it starts with the person that we are ourselves. We can't change anyone else. You can't go in and change a force if you did not have the stories to talk about how you made that transition yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important that, beyond accountability, we have to, stand up and state, whether we condemn a certain act or behavior. That, the officer that killed George Floyd, we as police officers, as a police community, have to stand up and say we condemn that. And not only George Floyd, but other incidents where even if an officer had the legal right to take a life, was it right to take that life? Was it
Mhm.
necessary? And that sort of thing. And we have to stand up and condemn it because if we don't condemn it, we condone it. And on the flip side, when officers are killed or assassinated or, different things happen from members of the community, we have to condemn that behavior as well, because if
Mhm.
not, we're condoning it. It's a
Yeah.
two-way street. Now, for law enforcement, we have the power of, being a government official. So I think we have a greater responsibility to be proactive when trying to change people's perception of us as police officers. As a police officer, you have an incredible amount of power. The only profession in this country where you have the authority to deprive a person of their freedom to move right now, because I said so. Now, I have to have just reason to do that, work within the guidelines of the law, but I have that power and authority. I have the power and authority to take somebody's life right now because, within the guidelines of the law, they did something that justifies me killing a life. Justifiable homicide is what we call it. Okay. So, not even a judge has that power. You have to, first of all, be in a state where there is the death penalty, and then a person has to be tried and convicted, and then a judge can, make the determination that the death penalty is going to go. But as a police officer, right now, I can take your life if you do this, 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 this. So, an
Mhm.
awesome amount of power and authority. So with that comes a great amount of responsibility. It's like the Spider-Man line, with
Right.
great power comes, comes great responsibility. And, that's true for us as police officers. So, it can't be this us against them mentality. We have to do our parts, but everybody, equally has to do their part when it comes to, again, letting our perception of an individual be formed by our interaction with that person, as opposed to painting the broad brush and saying they're all this way or they're all that way.
Right. I had never thought about what you just shared with that power. And there was always the idea, and wow, police officers have so much power, but to put it in words like you just did is so very powerful. Thank you so much, Harold.
Yeah, yeah, and there's there's something I'll share with you later. It's a documentary, but in that there was an officer who was going home from work. He drives his patrol car home, and he's almost home, and then in front of him he sees a car that's not driving, perfectly. Made a left turn without a turn signal, and are already in and out of the lane and things like that. And he says, "Oh gosh, I'm almost home." I'm almost home. Then he thought, what if that person's drunk? And what if my family was coming down that road? So he pulls him over. And as he's walking up, he says, he can see that it's a young black kid, and he looks and the kid's testing. He's like, whew, this is easy. So he goes up and the kid has his hands on the steering wheel and said, "What do you want me to do, officer?" You know, um, you know, and the officer said, "I don't want you to get hurt." And he said the kid just froze and he saw fear in this kid's eyes. And he says, "I know fear when people are nervous and they're doing something wrong." He said, "This kid was terrified of me." And he said, he said, the kid thought, he said, "I don't want you to hurt me, or I don't want to hurt you." And I was telling him, "I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to text and drive. I don't want you to have an accident. I want you to go home, and let your mama see her beautiful baby boy coming in the door, you know." And he said that's the first time he realized the problem, in our society, with the fear that so many individuals, and he said this was a white cop, and he said, young African American men, the fear that they have of law enforcement. He said, "We've got to do something about this. It's totally backwards." And he said it tore me up, and he posted it on Facebook. And then he said the next few days, just thousands of young black men from Detroit, Chicago, New York, texting him saying, "You changed my perception of police officers, by telling your story."
Hmm.
So that's a long story, Megan, but it's so relative to what we're talking about. You know, we have a say in the type of interaction and environment we're going to work in as police
Yeah.
officers. And our conduct and how we deal with certain people and certain things can have a
Yeah.
huge impact on how those people see us.
Absolutely. So powerful. And as I think about those listening to this right now, if you're not a police officer, if you're a community member, what you can do as we get ready for the day of accountability, but also just year round on a regular basis, what can we do to hold one another accountable? And one of the things that we've done in honor of this day as a remembrance and as a point for all of us to consider on a regular basis is we've created a free course for people to access. And it walks through activities and what this means and different definitions and what people can do, actionable steps as we move toward a more accountable society. I know people can just click the link below to sign the pledge for the Day of Accountability. And once they sign that pledge, they'll get access to that course. And again, that's a completely hybrid, completely free course. So we want to make sure we put that out there. We also want to let everyone know that it is important to continue the conversation, whether it is listening to podcasts, whether it's reading articles, but most importantly, and this is where I want to throw it back to you, Harold, if you are struggling with anything in your life, whether it is you're struggling because of a traffic stop that was difficult for you, or you're struggling because of something you see on TV, or right now with the political climate that we're in such a polarized society. But it is critical to, again, not just understand yourself, as our company says, but to take care of yourself first. It's the oxygen mask from the airplane, right?
Hmm.
But one of the ways that we can take care of ourselves is by seeking outside help and seeking support and counseling. I know you specialize in first responders and your practice specializes in first responders, but I think you could speak to the greater population of how important it is to go through some of that work. Could you share a little bit more about why the work you do is so critical for not just first responders, but for everyone?
Yeah, sure. And so we don't exclusively serve first responders. I launched my practice for that purpose, but being situated where I am in Southfield, Michigan, I get a lot of calls from, people from the community. So I actually see more people from the community in my practice now than law enforcement. I do other things with law enforcement on a consistent basis. But, a lot of times we think, the only reason to go and see a therapist or a counselor is because we had some kind of catastrophic event going on in our lives, or we're suffering from some psychological disorder and things like that. Most people are just simply dealing with stress and anxiety, or feeling depressed, or actually being depressed because of life issues and life situations. And we attribute a lot of things to COVID. And what I tell people is that even if you weren't directly affected by COVID, or you don't think you were, what COVID did, was restrict our ability to do the things that are fulfilling in our lives. Meet and commune with other people, have interactions, go out and engage in meaningful and pleasurable social events and activities and things like that. And a lot of people, just did not come out of that or recover from that restriction on their lives. And so again, it may be just a slight little alteration that has happened in your life, but it's affected your ability to be fully functional emotionally, physically, in other areas of your life, intellectually, relationally. So those are things that a professional therapist can help you. We call it peel back the onion on, and so that you can take an objective look at how you're being in your life. And sometimes it's just some minor things, that minor adjustments people need to make to really get them back to engaging in their lives and it becoming fulfilling again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything that you do, Harold, and for sharing your story today. I know I gathered so much from it, and I'm sure our listeners did as well. Um, Everyone else, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you check us out, follow us on social media, follow our YouTube account. We will continue to have special guests. Make sure you click the link below for Day of Accountability. We'll also attach Harold's information as well so you can get in touch with him. But again, everyone, thank you. It is our responsibility to hold not only ourselves, but everyone else accountable, because how we handle today is how tomorrow will turn out. And we need to make sure we're taking every minute of today to make sure that tomorrow is a better day. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Megan. Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.